Welcome to this week's episode of Promising Young Surgeon. Today, we're diving into the world of medical device sales with a guest whose career trajectory is inspiring and impressive. In this episode, we'll explore what it's like to work in such a fast-paced, competitive industry and the unique challenges that come with being in the operating room alongside surgeons, ensuring that they have all the right tools for their jobs. Azrene Matin will share how she transitioned from sales in other industries into the medical field, how she navigates technical aspects of her role, and what it's like to make a real difference in the operating room. Azrene Matin's career in sales started at only 14 years old, walking door to door selling kitchen knives in the nicer neighborhoods where her mom dropped her off. From a young age, she focused on working in roles that allowed her to dictate the outcome of her work. Her goal-oriented mentality has allowed her to go from earning her first $500 tip as a waitress in college to earning a position with a Fortune 500 medical device company. When she isn't working, she spends her free time pursuing her passions by spreading the love that she has for animals and wildlife through creating and volunteering. Azrene has rescued, rehabilitated, or fostered over 30 cats and dogs in the past 10 years. If you don't find her in the shelters, you may find her in the Pilates studio where she is a certified instructor, or in the kitchen as she works towards successfully making a French macaroon after many failed attempts. I have to add my own fun fact here, which is that Azrene and I first met in the operating room over 5 years ago now, and that was back in Missouri. People do ask me at parties, all the time how we met, and I tell them literally that we found love in a hopeless place. We have both since moved to the Nashville area, and it is such a huge pleasure to welcome my friend Azrene to Promising Young Surgeon.
Thank you so much, Frances May. It is such an honor to be here and to see how far we've come. I mean, from having love in a hopeless place to finally being at the point where we can talk about it.
Yes, thriving, not just surviving anymore. Very happy to have made it to 2025. And, you have always been a person with very incisive business acumen. I feel like, we met in the OR. Again, for kind of context for everyone, we met because we did a lot of facial trauma, things like that. And of course, we're not going to name company or brand names at all in our discussions today. That's totally fine because, we're talking about medical device sales. And Azrene's expertise has been in CMF. And I'll definitely have you talk a lot more about what that is about, what that's like, what that entails. But basically what that means is that at the end of the day, we got to fix a lot of broken jaws together, like a lot of mandible fractures, mid-face fractures, facial trauma type cases. And so what's so great is, you don't always get to form real connections with your medical device reps or anything like that. But sometimes in, mandible fractures, depending on the attending or things like that, we'll all get to talk a little bit in the OR. And I feel like one day we didn't know each other that well, but we almost, I was talking to you in the hallways outside of the OR and we kind of got to talking. And in 15 minutes, you were like, I hear you. And this is kind of the vision. I think you should do 1, 2, and 3. You had a business plan. You were like, anyway, that's what I would do. And, and I was like, oh my gosh, who is this? You always have your eye on the prize. You love the game. You're great at the game. And so, I think that there's a lot that we can learn from you in that regard. Can you just first open by sharing with everyone, kind of the day in the life, the role, the responsibilities, just painting a picture of what your daily job has looked like?
Yeah. So, just to kind of backtrack a little bit, I've been in CMF, so that is craniomaxillofacial, and there is a vast difference in the work life of many different types of medical device reps. The route I chose was trauma heavy, and that really comes with putting your work first. So making those sacrifices, making sure you're there for your surgeon or the hospital that might need something. But a day in the life looks differently depending on the territory that you're in. So the territory that we met in, was so incredibly different than the territory I'm in now. And I like to use the analogy of like farming versus hunting. Whereas, farming is where you have a lot of the business, you have agreements with hospital systems that are committed to using your product. And you're just really trying to make sure that you're providing the best possible service and support to get the most effective and optimize the use of your items in the OR. And then there's hunting, where you're really going out there and you're meeting with surgeons or you're meeting with hospital administration to tell them and share the benefits of using your products versus your competitors. I would say a day in the life of a medical device rep and where I'm at now, which is very hunting forward. It's really about finding where you can bring value. And that's tough especially when you're a new person in any hospital. Most people are looking at you like, what are you doing here? We don't need you. Because at the end of the day, they don't need you. You're in medical device sales. You're not a surgeon. Your patient or your hospital's patients will be fine without you. Your goal is to show yourself as a valuable asset to any team that you're a part of, that you can bring benefits and cost savings to the hospital, whether that's, in long-term benefit of the patient having a better recovery with using your product, or on the front end with, just having a bigger discount compared to your competitors. So I would say, a day in the life is going to at least 3 to 6 hospitals in a day, checking stock, making sure that, if there are any cases on the board, asking those surgeons that might have a case that day if they need anything, supporting their cases, fielding questions throughout the day, looking at any orders that might have a back order, keeping track of your shipments, restocking sets. There are things that you do to sustain your business and there are things that you do to grow your business. So it's also setting meetings and, being there to have in-services in the morning with the OR staff to make sure they understand, hey, you can call me, but here's exactly what to do if you see yourself needing to use this item on the shelf. So it really just depends on, what's going on that day. But on any given day, I think your goal is always to show that you're present, you're consistent, and you're going into these hospitals that have a lot of cases and they might need support. Because once you're there, I can't tell you how many times, I've never been called in, but when I'm there, they say, oh, now that I have you, here's a question I've been meaning to ask. And you can provide support that way.
Wow. I mean, it is fascinating because the scope of your responsibilities and kind of this role, like that's very daunting. That's a lot, and yes, back in the residency days, I covered 3 hospitals and that's it, like I guess that my question for you is, in terms of the skills that a person needs to bring to this job and that a candidate has to have, it's like I'm hearing obviously a lot of the quote unquote softer skills, because you have to have relational expertise, be a good communicator. Number 2, you have to have technical expertise because you have to know your product. And obviously there's a huge level of detail in that. Like I'll give you guys my take as a surgeon, because again, I'm not the expert at this. Like when Azrene and I used to do mandible fractures together, I loved all of her input and expertise and wisdom. And I'd be like, hey, this is the fracture line. Like, I'm showing you on the scan or here in the OR. Like we're all physically standing in the OR together. She's not scrubbed into the surgery, so she's standing like a couple feet back from the table. But, we can say, here's a fracture line. I had this thought. I wanted like a 6-hole plate. I wanted 3 holes on each side of the fracture line. What do you think of this shape? And, because I'm amazing at it, she'd be like, I love that shape. You're killing it, Dr. Hardin. No, I'm just kidding. She'd be like, that's not the right shape. Do this other shape. And I'd be like, okay, true. That was my second choice shape. So then we do the but she, she really like reps have this expertise and study like the different fracture patterns, can advise intraoperatively, things like that. And then what really is tough, because, we're joking, but I think that the plate, like hole number, shape, that's more intuitive to me. Then it's the screws, because the screws are such different shapes, heads, diameter, length, like you have to it matters, of course, like their 3-dimensional size. And that is like extremely where, I mean, I've seen you do this a million times now, for whichever attending surgeon, for whatever senior resident, like helping with screw selection and things like that. So we've talked about, I mean, you have to have soft skills, you have to have technical skills, you have to have whatever it is that allows us to take trauma call, because you're basically on trauma call. So that's another like inner fire and skill that we can talk about. And you also have to have project management skills, basically, is like what I feel like you're describing with like doing all the accounts, all of your own supplies. I mean, that is not a joke. So I mean, this is almost like you have to be good at everything. That's what I'm hearing, is like, to be good at this job, you have to be good at all those things we listed. And that is not easy. I would think that that's daunting for like the next generation of med device reps.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I try not to think about all the things that I have to take care of at once, because it is very daunting. And the most that you can do is take it one step at a time and make sure that you're putting your goals in the forefront of what you're doing, but also you remember that you're a guest at every hospital that you're in. So, just making sure that you're doing things by the hospital's policies, and every hospital is different. Every hospital also has their own political dynamics and who they want you to get approval from. And, there are definitely a lot of moving parts. And I think, a big part about medical device sales is grit, and just having resilience, because while you're managing all these things, you're going to have a million roadblocks put in front of you in order to make something happen. So you can have the best possible opportunity put onto your lap, and it might be the hardest thing to even come into fruition. It might take 2 years, because you can't just bring something into a hospital. You have to get the right approvals in order to make that happen. So you can have a surgeon who really wants to use your product and does these cases every single day. He does 3 cases every day, he or she, and it might take 2 years for you to actually get that on the shelf. So in the meantime, you're filling in the gaps with, really just scraping down the bottom of the bowl to get whatever you can to reach your goals. But also remembering that, this job, I think you can be very successful, but I choose to believe that even if you're not successful the first year or the second year, if you're doing things the right way, and if you have a very high sense of integrity, that success will come to you. I mean, there have been many times when I've been in cases where someone has asked me what my opinion is of what type of plate or screw to use. And, if I really cared more about the goals than the patient, then of course I could say the most expensive plate and act like that's the one. But you know what that ruins? Can you guess what that ruins? Yes, exactly. Right on the money. Without trust, you have nothing. You have nothing to build your business on and your reputation. I think, one important thing to keep in mind with this industry is that it's not like a regular sales job where it's just a numbers game, where you're just trying to get in front of the most people that you possibly can. And then you're going to have a meeting with a number of those people. So say you get in front of 100 people, 10 people will get a meeting with you. Only one person will close. You'll only be able to close one person and actually have one deal out of that 100. This job, you have to be a lot more strategic, because there's only a finite amount of plastic surgeons in your territory. And if you lose your trust with one, then it makes it a lot harder to gain clout in your reputation with the others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point from a pure number standpoint. Like, this is a much smaller pool than other types of sales jobs. I mean, I definitely agree with you about grit. And here's my question. I love that you started your sales career at 14, and I'd love to hear, where does the grit come from? Because I agree, like, there's something very internal. I've not seen you work for like external motivators. I've known you for years, seen you work really hard, and like, honestly, not complain about it for years. And, I say that obviously with extreme respect, I'm like one of those people who's working very hard and complaining loudly about it like the whole time, just kicking and screaming. But you have like an internal drive, and maybe I would call it a peace about you or a peace with your work that like we do not all have that. And so where does it come from? How can we cultivate it? What is that like?
I think a big part of my internal drive is genuinely caring about what I do and feeling like I have a sense of purpose through this position. I don't think about it being a sales job. I think about how lucky I am to help people get their identities back. I mean, that's what it comes down to. When you're in an OR and there is a 3-month-old on the table and, they haven't been able to breathe because their tongue has been obstructing their airway, and you're able to provide them a solution to that by your pediatric mandibular distraction, for example, and you're slowly lengthening their bone so that their tongue can rest in their mouth accordingly while they're so young. And you see that baby on the table, nothing else matters. All that matters is that you're doing your piece. You're making sure your products are sterile. You have plenty of options for your surgeon. And if there's travelers, that might not know what they're doing, the instruments on the table so that you can help them be as efficient as possible in that case. And keep the patient from being under anesthesia for, as long as possible, like just making sure that that case happens as smoothly as you can. I would say a big part of that is just, passion, caring about what I do. I don't think I could be successful in this job or any sales job if I didn't believe in it and what I represent. I'm definitely not the type of rep that will just push something that may have just come to market. I want to see how it does in the field first. I want to see what feedback I get from my colleagues that might be using it before I introduce it to my customers and their patients. But I also think it comes from knowing that I have the power to dictate the outcome of my work. And that is why I've always leaned towards sales. I didn't come from a very prosperous family, but I did come from a family that worked really hard and really valued helping people. And I wanted to be in control of that, but also work in an industry where I felt like I was helping people. And I genuinely feel that way with this position.
Yeah, that's a beautiful sentiment. No, I definitely, like, I see it that you have a sense of purpose with your work. And I know that you've talked about cases that have really moved you, and I want to get to that where you can tell us, about some of these like really formative, like career affirming types of cases that you've done. For context for everyone, part of what she's describing, for example, is like PRS or Pierre Robin sequence. I've heard it pronounced Robin. We don't talk about it that much anymore, thankfully, since I'm not like in the textbooks board phase. But for PRS, in those situations, like the jaw, it's very small and it's kind of like set back. And so then that forces, there's not enough room for the tongue in the mouth, like she's saying, for it to lay appropriately. So like in that distraction type of surgery, like, yeah, that's, and it's not a nothing surgery. That's not like a small surgery in a baby. That's not a tongue tie, that's being addressed with a frenulectomy, like a little cut or anything like that. This is where you have to actually break the jaw. Like you have to cut the mandible to then pull it forward, pull it out a little bit, and then there's obviously a lot of like, that's where you come into play about, well, how to secure it and how they set up these fancy distraction type devices, right?
Correct.
I mean, I could definitely get as far as the mandible cuts and moving the mandible. And then, yeah, I'd be like, okay, well, we don't do that type of case, but I'd be like, I need an expert to help me get the equipment piece, like the recon of it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I want to go again back to the past a little bit, just because like a common question that I do hear, like I see it online, people have asked me, I mean, there are people who know that I'm friends with you and they asked to be put in touch with you, right? Because you have a job that like a lot of people are interested in, that a lot of people want. Like young people are often, I think, very attracted to med device sales, and like their common questions are, how did you break into it? And then the second fold piece of that would be, how would you advise, like a young, hungry person? Like what do they need to do to become you?
Yeah. I would say my journey was not easy to get into this industry. And there are definitely people that are really lucky and might have the right relationship and get a job with a really great medical device company right out of college. I was not that person. I actually just continued to build my network. When I knew I was interested in medical device sales, I tried to get in front of as many people that would give me the time of day and pick their brains about it and learn as much as I could.
Oh, I'm
That
sorry. What age
was
was that
that was when I was I want to say 19 or 20.
that you knew? Okay, I gotcha. So
Mhm.
19 or 20, and then you start
Yeah.
this networking push.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I didn't even know medical device was a job. I had worked in financial advising and life insurance, and I just got a really bad taste in my mouth. I did not feel as if it was the right industry for me, and I was really passionate about it when I started because my dad died when I was younger without life insurance, and so I felt that direct impact on my family. But then I realized before I graduated college that it wasn't really for me, and my boyfriend at the time, who's now my fiance, he's the one who actually told me, "Oh, you should get into medical device sales." And now in hindsight, I look at myself and I had already had years of sales experience. And it wasn't the right type of sales experience. What I needed was business to business sales experience because at the end of the day, medical device recruiters don't want to hire you to train you how to sell. This is not the place for you to learn how to sell. And believe me, I know plenty of people who have gotten into the industry with no sales experience, but I personally was not that one. And knowing how to sell from business to business is really what medical device recruiters are looking for. And that's what I was told from a Gore rep years and years ago. When I picked his brain, he just said, hey, work at ADP, Paycor, or Paychex. Medical device recruiters look for people that have worked within those companies because they have a really good training program. And that's exactly what I did. I just took his advice immediately when I graduated. I worked at ADP. And, it was a tough job, but I found my passion in it working with small businesses. And my motivation was just to do really well so that medical device companies could look at my resume and see that I have been trained, I know what I'm doing, and they would be more eager to put me in the system as a notable candidate for any type of role.
Quick question. What is ADP?
ADP is payroll sales. So how you're getting paid. So if you have a small business and you're dealing with, all the income taxes, and at the time it was COVID and, the Paycheck Protection Program loan from COVID and just navigating what it's like to be a business owner and paying your employees and making that as easy as possible with software.
Oh, that's really cool. So is
Yeah.
it kind of like a software sales job in
Yeah,
that regard?
absolutely.
Oh,
It is
I gotcha.
100% a software sales job. Yep.
Learn something new every day. Hear about
Yeah.
a new type of job. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Obviously, that type of work is getting done, but especially when you are more of a person who was like on my track, where you were a teenager, you entered medicine. Now I'm 33 years old, and I've never heard of ADP. You just miss
Yeah.
out on some of like what these basic things are.
And it's totally okay. I mean, it's one of those companies that you don't even think about
Yeah.
existing.
And so that's very interesting. So they have a formal training program for
They do. They
for
do.
their young people. That's really cool. Did
Mhm.
did you feel like you learned a lot?
I, you know, I did. I did feel like I learned a lot. I didn't feel like it was a perfect fit for me either, but I knew I had to do what I had to do and I had to do it well if I was to move on to where I really wanted to be. I actually got to the point where I turned down an award that I won to have like 4 nights in Cabo. just for a competition that they had going. to take on the job with the company that I chose to work with in medical device.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I know. I told myself, listen, I'm going to take myself to Cabo one day. It's going to be okay.
I love that. No, you're right. I mean, there's okay, this quote I really like. I saw it and it was like, when you say no to the wrong money, the right money will find you. And I feel like there are kind of, elements of that in what you're describing with your like career path and everything.
Yeah.
So how long did you spend total at ADP? And then did you just start cold applying?
Yeah. I spent about 6 months at ADP and I'd been applying the whole time. I probably applied to multiple companies, my top companies, probably 20 times each, and my resume was never even looked at. But I'd been following up the whole time with reps that I knew were with companies that I wanted to be with. And I honestly followed up with one rep for 2 years. And he was actually the person that ended up referring me into the position that I took and started my journey with. Yeah. And I think, one thing I do want to mention is you're completely right. Medical device sales is a very sexy job. A lot of young people are very interested in it. So many people call me and ask me questions about it. But, I think a lot of people think, oh, hey, I'm good at talking to people. I'm very extroverted. I'd be good at medical device sales. And there is so much more to this job than just being a good communicator and just being extroverted. Like, you have to have an interest in learning. You have to have an appetite to fail and to get back up, because at the end of the day, like, you are disposable to the highest degree. I mean, you're going to have 5 other people ready to take your spot. So if you don't get up and know what you're doing and think that, oh, I can just sweet talk my way in. Listen, if I'm a surgeon and I have five vendors that I can choose from, and this vendor makes a mistake and forgets to make sure my set is sterilized, and they've had a month to know about my case, why would I give them another chance unless I genuinely like them? Or, if I can get someone cheaper to use it and I like that rep too, So I'd say there's so much more to it than what I think people understand. They just think, oh, attractive, I like to play games or sports, and there are really great reps out there that are also like that. But it takes a lot more strategy than I think people think.
Yeah, agreed. Or where they're just like, I could just be really charismatic, And yes, like there's stereotypes like that, maybe a young, charismatic, attractive person. But I totally agree with you because, like, as a surgeon, obviously, fine, a high level of charisma, whatever, like that sounds good. Obviously, I want to work with people who are easy to work with, who are pleasant. But especially when it comes to, I think those 2 big pieces, number 1 being like the technical expertise. So like, Riz alone is not going to make you know the correct sizes of things, and I know that, these are things that we've talked about before, but I've even seen it in the OR. Like when I was younger, coming up through the OR, I'd maybe be like an intern or a junior who was there, and the attending would kind of be like asking the rep, this is obviously not Azrene. This was just in a different context, but they'd be like, oh, what do you think for this? And the rep was kind of saying things that they thought, and the attending would just like never agree, in the sense that ultimately that rep ended up leaving because I think that a lot of attendings like didn't trust their work, like didn't trust the intraoperative calls being made. And again, I just say all that anecdotally because like those are things that I witnessed over my, time in training and things like that. So you do have to be good. Like Riz will not make you good at some of those intraoperative calls and then gaining the trust of a surgeon. Because yes, like this directly impacts surgical quality, patient outcomes. So this is, at the end of the day, it is like we're talking about very serious work. The room for error is none, in contrast to, I guess, like other sales jobs where it's not like a life online. It's not like an implant that you're putting into somebody's body where, yeah, it matters a lot. If like even something like a screw extrusion or something like that. I mean, not that that would be fatal to someone, but extremely unpleasant. I mean, it's a big deal. No one wants that to happen to their patient. So I've seen that, but then the number two one being really even like project management skills, things like that, because I could envision someone who's like, they are charismatic, check. Number two, they're a smart cookie. So check. Like they're pretty good at being like, they can look at any fracture pattern and be like, I got you. I've got a plan for that. But then they aren't good at this, juggling multiple sites, juggling so many surgeons, juggling all the trays across multiple sites, making sure that things are restocked. Like I think that it was only years after we first met that I learned that you were restocking the little screw trays by hand.
Yeah.
How many screws are in those trays?
Well, they can range from 40 to 120. And I build those entire sets. It is all done by hand. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, I really want people to know. And Azrene, yes, she's attractive. Yes, she's charismatic. She's very petite. She not only builds these sets, but then you have to haul them around. And they are like the size and weight of you, getting that in and out of cars and in and out of hospitals. Obviously, I'm very pro people getting into medical device sales and things like that, but I'm also very pro transparency in terms of like, is the job all glamorous? And does Riz make your trays for you?
Absolutely not. I mean, I do think that we should touch on something that I think is really important with this job, and that's having a high sense of emotional intelligence, because you can have the best surgeon who wants to use your stuff all day, but guess what? You're not working with just a surgeon. You're working with a circulator. Your life depends on your surgical technician. You're working with hospital administration. I mean, there are so many different personalities that are in the mix. And if you're not able to adapt and figure out how to work with those personalities to be the most effective, or no, for example, when you're in a case and, hey, the person that you're working with, your surgeon's not happy. And that's probably not the best time for you to be cracking jokes. You're going to just intensify the situation. So I think, having a high sense of self-awareness and just the ability to pivot when needed and adapt to different personalities that are in the room that you need to make your product the most effective in that case. I mean, that's such a big part of the job too.
You're so right. I mean, I'm glad you bring that up specifically because I have seen that. Like, literally, I have the ick just thinking about it. But like, and that's true for every single person who works in the OR at all. Like medical students often face this when they are first coming in the OR and like, yeah, it's hard to get a read of the room. They don't know like when would be a good time to like ask a medical question. When's a good time to ask a more like personal or fun or light question. And it can be difficult to even totally tell because especially when you're new, you don't know like really what point in the case we're at. You don't know if like this silence is like a bored silence or a very strenuous, like we have arterial bleeding that we've gotten into silence. And so somebody could get their head bitten off if they can't read the room. And so I love you pointing out that skill. I did want to ask you, your onboarding into the OR and getting used to the OR, and frankly, even your career in the OR is obviously very different from mine. But what was the onboarding and like the early training process in there, basically? Like, did anyone formally teach you how to read, to be like, hey, watch out for this with the, attending surgeon or with the chief resident? Like, what was that like for you? Just like learning everyone's role, finally understanding this would be like a good time for me to gently offer my advice, things like that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I was exceptionally lucky with the mentor I had when I, started my career in medical device, and he was able to give me not just, the medical device answer, but the clinical answer with his background in medicine as well. But I would say that onboarding looked like a lot of training. So obviously, you can't just walk into an OR. You have to have credentials within the hospital. They have to allow you to get in there, and you have to have proper identification. So you have to have a badge. A lot of people know medical device salesmen as, wearing a red cap. And my understanding of why we wear a different color bouffant cap in the OR to cover our hair is so that if something happens during a procedure, whoever's looking into the camera that's covering that OR will see where the rep is, because that's not an employee of the hospital. But I would say onboarding and being in cases for the first couple of months, I was terrified. I mean, I was so incredibly scared that I was going to touch something and contaminate it, or that I was going to say something wrong, or that I was going to look like an idiot. And to be honest, I probably still look like an idiot. But it was really a lot of hugging the wall, of learning, observing, and taking it in, and understanding how the cadence of every single case flows between each surgeon. So one surgeon might do a case completely different than another surgeon, but you want to understand how the team kind of works together. And honestly, I really just stood back and observed, but made sure that I understood, okay, hey, as a medical device rep, like, I probably should hold off on actively going up and tying gowns until I know exactly how to tie a gown really fast and there's no circulator in the room. I mean, it's little things like that where you can either build value or ruin the entire case. I would say there was one time, this story, in a neurosurgical case. So it was a long case. These cases are tough because a lot of the time you can't see anything that's happening. And so you're just standing there being professional. And again, back to emotional intelligence, your body language when you're first starting and you're trying to build a confidence in who you are in the room, you might not think anyone notices, and maybe they don't because they're probably not focused on you, but you're thinking about it. And so when I first started, I wasn't thinking about it was a problem. And I was right there next to a case trying to kind of figure out what's going on. And, you work long hours in this job. So I was pretty tired. And I'd been in that case for 6 hours at this point. And my mentor was right beside me. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, I'm just going to shuffle my feet back and forth. Like, that's helping me stay awake because it's so quiet. And, no one's looking at me. Everyone's focused on the patient. And he pulls me aside and he's like, you're distracting. You're a distraction to the case. And that moment was pivotal for me. There is not a time that I did that again. Like, if I'm tired, I go grab some coffee and come back. But I would say onboarding looked like just being incredibly self-aware, holding the wall. Like, I tell people all the time, like, if you need to find me, I'm holding up this wall over here. It's strong. I realize it's really strong. So just so you know, but staying out of the way and understanding the role that you play in the case is really what's important about when you're in the OR.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, it's tough. It's tough because, like, I hear that and my heart goes out to you because, like, that has been me a million times, especially like in the med student role, particularly. And then even like the intern, like a first year surgery resident. Like, in those situations, sometimes you are on a stool in the back corner of the room and you can watch on a teeny screen or something like that. But I mean, 6 hours is a long time. And I used to just be like, I hope I don't fall asleep and fall off of this stool altogether. And so I get it. And I mean, depending on what type of surgery these people are doing, or I guess conceivably, if somebody was in their peripheral vision, could a little shuffling be distracting? It's just really funny because, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. I'll do it. I'll do it because we're friends. So to play devil's advocate, it's just funny because we know that there are double standards in many industries, mine included, for sure. When in the past, like, we'll use the example of somebody coming in the middle of surgery. Like, I'm operating, so I'm focused on the case. And somebody comes in just to talk, like just to chat. And they're like, oh, I'm just checking in. I want to say hi to everybody, like what's going on, checking in, just cruising around the room, and leaves. And like there was no purpose to them being there other than to like look at my stuff, my business. That I have found pretty distracting. And when I mentioned that I found that distracting, I was like, that's, seems unnecessary. I mean, not seems unnecessary. It is unnecessary, period. And it can be distracting. Like I don't care for it, right? I'm an attending. The counterpoint that was made to me was like, you need to be able to operate with distractions. Like, what, like if somebody talks in the room, like that'll distract you. I was like, that's pretty different from a person who has nothing to do with the case. Unrelated to the case, not related to my practice. Coming in to cruise around and ask questions and just like be like, what's everyone up to? And then leave. That's pretty different from like a circulator asks a question of a scrub tech. They answer the question. I've never found that distracting, but it's just so funny to me because I can picture tons of scenarios where maybe it's a different surgeon. So something like that, a rep being in the corner of the room, maybe barely perceptibly in your peripheral vision, they move their feet. And it's like, we have to kill this rep. Like, just, I never want to see
Get
this
her
face
out of
again.
here.
Exactly. Whereas, I think in my personal experience, it's been very, and if I was like, this rep, she shuffled her feet, they would be like, wow, we need to look at why you can't operate with distractions. It's just, so I think that part's interesting, but, I always learn a lot when I hear from you about like what professionalism has meant like in your line of work. And, I know you hold yourself to a really high standard. I'm just kind of like questioning some of those standards. And I question why the rules like aren't the same for everyone. You know what I mean?
Okay, well, let me ask you this. The people that interrupt your cases and might ask you these questions and not really care about where you're at in your procedure, just to kind of take a peek. I can see it now because I see it all the time. They'll come in, they just want to see what's going on. The hands will be behind the back and they're just taking a peek at the table. How often are they also other surgeons or someone with a very, a higher level of authority?
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
All the time.
100%. No, I mean, like, this would never happen with, like, of course. So, right. So there's a power dynamic that's now introduced uninvited. That can be distracting. I mean, yeah, exactly. So it's just like, it's compromising. It's unnecessary. It's born out of, some kind of maybe personal ego-driven motivations. But I think it's funny because I think that it depends a lot on who the person is who's like naming a distraction or not. Because like we're not held to equivalent standards across the board in this industry. And that's something obviously we talk about all the time on this podcast.
Yeah, no, I little things like sitting down when I know that you guys have been standing out for hours, like that just feels uncomfortable for me because I never want to give the perception that I'm ungrateful for being there or that I'm not here putting in just as much as you might be. Although I know I'm not. I'm not, at the end of the day, I'm not the one operating, but I do want to have that team effort of you guys knowing, hey, I'm standing here. I'm just as in it. So when you need me, I am right there ready to go. I'm not sitting in the corner of the room on my phone, resting my feet.
Totally. No. And I mean, again, I've just, since we happen to have like been in the OR together a fair bit, absolutely. Like you have a good attitude about it. And I mean, I guess to an extent, it probably is teachable, but people have to want to learn it and understand it. And I'm sure that there's some natural predilections where some people are better than others at like bringing that energy into the OR. I wanted to ask, can you share with us, a memorable moment from an OR experience where your product or your knowledge, like, made such a pivotal, fulfilling difference in outcome? I'm
Yeah.
sure it's hard to pick just one, but I mean,
No, I have the perfect one, and this was such an impactful moment of my career, and I remember this day as if it was yesterday. I mean, it was my first gunshot wound case, and I was, very green still on the job. So I let my mentor really lead the case, and I just stood in the back and I watched. And this case went from 7 a.m. in the morning to probably 11, 12 o'clock at night. And every team was involved. It was all hands on deck. They had every single one of our plating systems on the field. So, for those of you who might not be facial trauma based, it is, multiple different screw sizes, different plate sizes, because you're fixating and you have different purposes for every type of plate, right? And to not get into the weeds, I mean, there are probably, 5 different sets that are open right now. And I mean, you're constructing someone's face from nothing. Um, and it was just a really long case. So everything was out on the table. I found that like our biggest job during that case wasn't to teach them how to use it, because at this point, they'd already, multiple people, in the OR and in the residents and the staff, they all knew how to use our sets already. But it was really just so chaotic that our job just became, where's Waldo? When they ask for something, where did it go? Because they're moving. They're moving. I mean, they have so much to get done. And that's where we really focused on, is like, okay, when they need something, like we can point exactly to where it is. So you have that extra second back to go back into plating where you need to plate. But I remember, just having the biggest eyes and just like really soaking it all in. I mean, there was so much going on. There was neuro, there was plastics, there's ENT. I mean, every single specialty was here to help, because it was just that bad. And there was one moment, there were a couple moments. There was one moment where, the tech that was giving our tech that we had throughout the majority of the case a break looked at us and said, I hate y'all. I hate it. I hate working with y'all. And we're just like, okay, like we really need you to, care. And this tech, bless her heart, I think she was trying her best, but she just hated how small our screws were. And that's what it came down to, is she just didn't want to be there. And it was a learning lesson for me, because the moment and the time of this case, I mean, the stress was high. And so her coming in to relieve the circulator we had, our screws are so small, and the way that she was handling everything, I mean, it was such a sensitive conversation, because this person was going to snap at any moment. I mean, she hated being there. And oddly enough, she wore sunglasses in the OR, and she had bad hearing. So you don't know if she's looking at you or if she can hear you.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, it was just every possible, unfortunate quality you could have all into one. Hated being there, can't hear, can't see, in the thick of a very complex case where you're using 500 different sets, and they're all really tiny, which she also hated. And I remember this moment where she was just taking our sets, and, everything was moving around. Like there were people here, and they're all trying to work, off the table, get stuff set up so they can come back over here where the patient was. And I just remember every time she'd move, for example, we have screws for the upper face that are 1 point, so for, I don't want to get into specifics, but they're, about 1 millimeter in diameter. So they're tiny, tiny. You can't even see them. Think about the screws on your glasses, those tiny little screws. Think about that as a comparison if you're listening. These screws are in a set, flat, right? And the lid was open because they're actively going back and forth, getting the screws and fixating, screwing them into the plate, things like that. And every single time she'd pick up a screw set to move it around, she'd slam it on the table, and you'd see all these little hundreds of screws just jump. And let me tell you, I was like, okay, I'm going to just bless my lucky stars, or thank my lucky stars that I'm not the one who has to say anything to her right now, because she is going to freak. And, that's where the nuance of being a rep comes in, because when you have someone that is unhappy and you're your job depends on them executing, then you want to take care of it as smoothly as possible. And in that moment, I mean, it was just such an intense moment to see how my rep handled it, or my mentor handled, communicating to her that, hey, like, maybe don't slam down the sets, because as soon as those screws fall, I mean, that's just a shit show. And I hope that's okay to say. But it was, I mean, we have multiple sets on the shelf, but they were using pretty much all of them, because you need multiple sets to fixate such intense damage. And I would say, the moment, like, that's one moment I'll always remember, because then she corrected herself. Thank gosh. And I think to myself, how can someone make something like that about them? I could not understand it. But in that case, the residents and had me hold up pictures of this person, because I needed to see how to construct their nose again. He had nothing. And so I was holding up pictures of this person, and there are pictures of his family. So I'm flipping through them, helping them get a good reference point to what he looked like, in order to get him as close as possible to that. And I remember feeling such a heavy heart when I got back into my car. I mean, I'd been holding myself together for so long. I got back into my car around midnight after that case. My back hurt. I mean, what I felt didn't even matter, because all I cared about was that this person and their family are dealing with that right now. And I just remember crying. I was in the parking garage of the hospital, and I just remember crying, because that was such an intense case. And every single screw was needed. And, there are little differences in each screw. So you're just on top of it. Like, you're constantly just looking and, being 110% for however many hours straight. Because it's not about you anymore. It's not about you. It's not about how many screws they use. It's about the patient and the surgeon getting exactly what they need to get the results that they're looking for. And you're just the catalyst to that. And I like to say, when you think about medical device jobs, and I personally don't like to think of it as sales jobs, I like to think about it as a consulting job, because really, you want your surgeon, you want your hospitals, whatever industry that you're in, you want them to focus on the patient. I would want my surgeon to know all the innovative techniques to do, but it's just like technology. It constantly changes. And so you want your rep to be the specialist in that, because you have too many more important things to focus on. And I really do think that's the true role of a medical device rep in the OR. It's not just to be there to make sure things flow smoothly when their items are used, but is there to be a consistent person to keep you in the loop of, new innovations that might be a good choice to save your patient more money, or to make this case more efficient, or, whatever it may be. But your job is to educate, to consult, and to help execute a smooth case. It's not to sell or to push product, because if you're doing that, then you might not have the right motivations.
Totally. And I agree with you. Like, of course, as a surgeon, I mean, I want to know all the new approaches, technologies, devices at all times. But like, yeah, that's typically not realistic. And so it is a team effort to continually stay on top of all the new developments, any updates to standards in care, and to do the best job for the patient. I am so glad, though, that you shared more about, like, yes, the screw sizes. I wanted to point out to everyone, like, when we were talking about loading a tray by hand for 140 of these screws, what's crazy is that the tray itself is not very big. Like, I mean, it's like mouse pad size. And so 140 screws on that, I could probably fit, 6 screws, if not more, onto my pinky fingernail. That's how teeny they are. That's quite teeny. That's why I really marvel at, like, how tedious to set up these trays, make sure that they're perfect. Like Azrene mentioned, I mean, a 1 millimeter difference, that would be clinically significant, but maybe not like visually. No, visually, you're just looking at a sea of very teeny, delicate screws. So, I also wanted to, say how much I can identify with the emotional toll of like these gunshot wound injuries to the face. I've seen, probably a dozen over my career, and they are very devastating. Often what happens is that it can be like a suicide attempt that fails. But with a lot of these injuries, like you described a case where kind of the nose was gone as a consequence of the injury. So like sometimes patient survives, but the mid face gets destroyed. I think it's just outside of the scope of the conversation to go into like why the mid face gets destroyed when people fail in this manner to commit suicide. But what happens is it can be like very aesthetically, like cosmetically disfiguring, but it's not life threatening. Like can often spare, it's good that it spares like major arterial, crucial structures. And so patients survive. But now the challenge for this like multidisciplinary team is to give as good, as excellent as possible of a reconstruction, which is, very major. You're describing 17 easily 20-hour surgeries sometimes at times. So yeah, those are like very difficult cases. They're difficult cases. And by the way, it doesn't just end there. It's pretty much never just one case. I mean, you're describing step one of could be 10 surgeries ultimately, like little recons and updates and things like that. You're just talking about, when the patient comes in immediately following gunshot wound injury. So absolutely. I mean, obviously the CMF team, the rep who's there, I can see exactly what you're talking about with like how crucial of a member of the team they are, particularly on those types of just crazy, huge breath type of cases. It has been such a pleasure to chat with you today. I want to close with my favorite question. Do you believe in karma?
Gosh, I really hope she's real. I do. So yes, I do believe in her. Because if she's not real, then that would be horrible.
Yeah, a little disappointing, but
Yeah.
thank you so much, Azrene, for sharing your incredible journey with us today. Your story is a genuine testament to the power of hard work, determination, grit, like you mentioned, but also the goal-oriented mindset. Where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
I have listed my LinkedIn, and that would be the best possible option. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Any last words you want to leave us with?
I'll leave you with this. It's a good joke. People ask me all the time how I got into medical device sales or what made me want to get into medical device sales. And I like to say that my parents always wanted me to be a doctor. They really did. But I told them, no, mom, dad, I really want to work with the plates and screws. And so sometimes you just kind of end up where you're meant to be, and you can feel like you're helping people in a way that you never expected. But what's most important is just having a sense of integrity and being ethical with what you do, because this job is so rewarding if you go about it the right way.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much for having me.
Follow me on Instagram at francismay.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Promising Young Surgeon. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Remember that every step in your journey, no matter how challenging, is part of the story that will shape you. If you'd like to submit any questions for future episodes, email me at pys@heyinfluent.com.